This is commentary on Workbook Lesson 60 in the Workbook of A Course in Miracles. It's the last lesson in the first review, and we're going through lessons 46 through 50. So I've often described these first 50 lessons. One way to look on them is that it's sort of a short little whistle tour of the whole thought system of the course, but also its practices. If you remember in the introduction to the workbook, we're training our minds to learn to think along the lines the text sets forth, or rather that we're learning to think with God about who we are. And so if you recall from the introduction to the text, that the object of learning here is not knowledge and truth. It's finding all the obstacles that we've placed between us and the truth, and then removing those obstacles. So it says in the introduction to the text, we're not teaching the meaning of love, we're teaching you to remove the blocks to the awareness of that love. And having done that, since love is all that there is, then that will be our experience. And we're just learning that there, first of all, are blocks, and then how to remove them. So another way to put that, the text puts that, is the lesson is not that you're one with God, or that your will is one with God. The lesson is that you can have no will or being separate from God, and there's a subtle difference there. So we're training our minds to know the difference between the different experiences we have, and what is reflective of this false image of self and what's reflective of this truer image, how that process begins and how we learn to see it. Let me go back to one of the first lessons here when it talks about the mind training in some very specific way. And this is from, I think it's lesson 4, that says these thoughts do not mean anything. And in this paragraph it says, this is a major exercise and will be repeated from time to time in somewhat different form. So the aim here is to train you in the first steps towards the goal of separating the meaningless from the meaningful. It's the first attempt in the long-range purpose of learning to see the meaningless is outside you and the meaningful within. And it's also the beginning of training your mind to recognize what is the same and what is different. So through these first 50 lessons, we've begun learning this idea that our inner world is not a function of what's going on outside of us. What's going on outside of us is a function of our inner world. And it's there that the first principle in miracles is that there's no order of difficulty. It's within ourselves that we know we can make a change. We can make another decision. We can decide to act or think differently. And then our experience of the world being different is also inherent in that lesson. Or as soon as we change our concept of self, we've changed our experience of the world that seems to surround us. And then secondly, it says here, it's also the beginning of training your mind to recognize what is the same and the different and different. And what that recognizes is that we've become, since we've made up this false image of ourselves, we've become confused about the attributes of our true self and our false self. And so we've mixed up fear and love, joy and misery, freedom and bondage, such that the fear and the bondage, lack of freedom, the fear that the ego experiences, that ego has projected that onto God or our true selves. And so we see that the freedom and the love that is in God, that's in our true selves, we've come to believe that that's a function of our ego self, and vice versa. So learning what is the same and what is different, how to know the difference between joy and misery, how to know the difference between love and fear, and know the difference between joy and misery, all of those opposite things is what we're training our minds to see. And that's obviously an unconscious process that we're trying to bring up because we're just not aware that we have invested love with fear, or freedom with bondage, or joy with misery. So we're learning to train those apart, and that's part of what it means to remove the obstacles to the awareness of love's presence. Okay, so also in these first 60 lessons or first 50 lessons, we've had sort of a summary of many of the practices that are in the course. A lot of them involved looking at our inner world, looking at the outer world, seeing the distinctions between the two, searching our minds, looking for our attack thoughts, our fearful thoughts, and making a decision to have those replaced. Some of the lessons were about just realizing that there is still this spot inside of us that's at perfect peace, joy, and love, and just going there, disregarding everything that's on the surface. So there's many different practices in this first 50 lessons that we'll be using throughout the training of our mind. So it's a good summary of the course, these first 50 lessons. I know that myself and others have found, like, just reviewing these this first review, just reviewing the thoughts from them can be very effective in centering our minds and remembering what's the content of our learning, what is it that we're learning, how are we doing that. Okay, so this is lesson 46. God is the love in which I forgive. This basic idea that God doesn't forgive, or the innocent don't forgive because they see nothing to forgive. And yet forgiveness is how we recognize that that innocence. And forgiveness here is a form of love that we can recognize. Love in its true nature is formless. It's beyond cognition. It's beyond conceptualization. It's the oneness. But we need some form of that here, and that's forgiveness. And that lets us know that this is the domain of learning. It's the domain of the wrong-mindedness and right-mindedness, and making a decision to move from wrong-mindedness to right-mindedness. That's what forgiveness empowers us to do, to see things correctly, to see them with the Holy Spirit. So forgiveness is central to our learning. It's very important part of the course. All right, so it's a reflection of God's love on earth. Remember that we're to read these lessons in this review, all 5 of them first thing in the morning, and then in the evening, and then throughout the day practice each one at least once. And if one jumps out at you, then you focus on that one. That's the lesson that for you is going to be used to help focus your mind and bring you into this awareness of the peace and love that's inside of you. So that is going to vary for all of us. So whatever, if one does stick out, then focus on that one. Okay, God is the strength in which I trust. It's an important aspect of understanding we're not alone, that we're not conscribed by this little self, that there's a much greater power in us, and they call that power God. And it's this strength of God that we remember when we're forgiving, and see this love as a reflection on earth. And as we forgive, we begin to feel this strength. So this is the idea of demonstrating to us the truth about ourselves. We have to learn how to forgive, and in that learning we demonstrate the strength of God. We demonstrate our truer self. It's one thing to just assert, well, this is your false, you have a false self, but here's your true self. We need to demonstrate that to ourselves, and forgiveness is the way that we do that. If we learn how to do this, if we learn that there's the strength inside of us that allow us to do that, then we're learning about our true nature. And then we begin to remember the love I chose to forget, but which has not forgotten me. So recognizing that we're not alone, that this love of God goes with us, the strength of God goes with us, that there is nothing to fear. Again, changing our inner world is what changes the outside world, and the world itself will look safe to us. It's not a place of anxiety or concern, of confusion or of despair. It's a place of safety. It's a place where we'll learn to see how to see everything as blessed, seeing ourselves as blessed. And it's a very different world from the one we see now from the ego standpoint. It's a beautiful line. I will recognize in everyone my dearest friend. Right? So we'll recognizing that we're all that one being, then we don't make our normal distinctions in perception. Everyone's equal in their ability to reflect this truer self back to us. And we're fearless in that world because we've forgiven. Okay, so God, and the next one is 49. God's voice speaks to me God's voice speaks to me all through the day. There's not a moment in which God's voice ceases to call on my forgiveness to save me. There's not a moment in which his voice fails to direct my thoughts, guide my actions, and lead my feet. I'm walking steadily on towards truth. There's nowhere else I can go because God's voice is the only voice and the only God that has been given to his Son. So this is where we're training our minds to be, is to be in that one moment. The only one that's there is that holy instant, and to bring our choices down to either we're forgiving or we're not. That's the distinction. There's not many different choices in there. They're all really some form of either unforgiveness or forgiveness. So that makes it simple to make the choice. Okay, so those are, that's this constant awareness that God's voice never ceases to call on our forgiveness to save us. And then finally, I'm sustained by the love of God. And as I listen to God's voice, I'm sustained by his love. As I open my eyes, his love lights up the world for me to see. As I forgive, his love reminds me that his Son is sinless. And as I look upon the world with vision, he has given me, I remember that his Son. All right, so one thing to emphasize here is to really understand this is a process, that we begin with the simplest of things and work our way towards building our strength and learning how to forgive, or learning how to think different and learning how to see different. All right, that's it for today. Thank you.